Cantor Eva. I'm also an artist. So I'm going to begin. I have a lot to share based on what I believe Rabbi Susan wanted me to address. But okay, hold on one second. The laptop is like my desk itself. I have to make sure that something is open. And when it's open, I can share it. And let's get the Zoom back. There's the Zoom. Let's try sharing and seeing if there it is. So now I'm going to open something. And I'm going to lift it up. I'm going to make it bigger. Hold on. Technology is a little bit demanding at times, but I'm also a late bloomer when it comes to technology. So we're going to talk about Sarah. We're going to talk about Sarah, this exceptional person. We know that her name was actually Sarai. And what's interesting is that she has a yud in her name, and yud in our tradition is connected to God, to holy presence. We have Yud He Vav He, which is the four-letter name of God. And the rabbis made a contraction that you see in your prayer books, which is double yuds. And that, again, is God's name. And at some point, God decides to take the yud away and change her name and Abraham's name, which is interesting. And one of the commentaries is they took the yud, God took yud, which is 10, and divided it in half so that there were two hays. And he gave one to her and he gave one to Abraham. So it's from Sarai, from that name and the yud, that the two hays emerge and their names change. And she was perceived to be absolutely beautiful. Adam and Eve were, of course, the first couple, and Eve was considered to be beautiful, but Sarah outshone her. And the name itself means princess. So we've gone to another Sarah, right? Here is Sarah in her old age. She's about 90, and Abraham's 100, and they have a baby. This is one of the most miraculous stories. And I would conjecture that Christianity was inspired by this story, which is where they come up with Mary and the Immaculate Conception. I have no doubt that it was inspired by Torah, as much of Christianity is inspired by what they call the Old Testament. And she was a matriarch. And you know, when she went on her journey with her husband, she was a teacher and a gatherer of the women, and she inspired them. So she was hospitable, she had a tent. But when you look at this image, it's sort of hard for us in a way to understand, because most of us are grandparents when we hold an infant like that, right? But I wanted you to see the beautiful Sarah and the one who's smiling, who is in her older age. And this is, let's see if I can move. I don't know if I can move. What it says up there is that Avraham, he sends out Hagar. And you probably are familiar with Hagar. She's the slave woman, the handmaiden to Sarah. She was a gift from Pharaoh. They brought her back from Egypt. And Sarai at the time, Sarai, was unable to conceive. And she felt it was so important for Avraham in the future that she gave the handmaiden to him. They have this boy, we can see who's crying, Ishmael. But at some point, Sarah realizes that there's a problem to have her in the household and to have this young boy. This could be a competitive thing with Isaac, as well as some of the commentary that talks about that they were together, they played together at a party. And some of the rabbis interpret this as being much more intimate than one might expect. And he was doing something inappropriate, which is why Sarah just loses it and says, they have to leave. We don't know exactly what was going on. Maybe they were having fun together. But she was, had a lot of allegiance to her son, was afraid that the other would also inherit. So she said, he's got to go. He's got to go. But these images, I think, help us to just kind of imagine what's going on. There's Sarah in the background. And remember, Abraham's a little bit uncomfortable, but God says, go to Sarah. Whatever she says, you do. So God gives Sarah a lot of power. He gives her, in a way, the charge that Abraham has to follow. So in this brief moment, which you may have talked about, I guess the question is what's really going on here? She talks about the inheritance, but you can imagine that maybe there is something else going on in her, jealousy, discomfort. And when you think about today, I use the word blended families. There are so many people who get married and they bring children from both families, right? And nobody is thrown out. They needed to be blended and respected all around. So we could raise the question what she's really feeling. She's the one that gave this woman to her husband. She said it's okay, gave him permission. And here she is. It's almost too hard for her to live with, or is she just being overprotective? What's really going on? I raised a question. We'll talk about this some more after the Akedah, after Abraham takes Isaac, on what the response is of why it really happened. Because this is the Akedah, correct? Isaac's on the altar. There's the angel. There's Abraham, ready to take his life. This is talking about when she dies. I don't want to go there right now. I want to show you the image. This is an artistic image of Sarah in the moment when she can't find Isaac. She doesn't know where he is. And it's so interesting that Abraham doesn't even come to her. She's supposedly the one who's sort of in charge. Whatever she says, do. How come he kind of disappears with her son? And she's left wondering, and she has this inkling like something is not right. Before we go here, I want to stop because we're going to talk about the Akedah. Yes, please, is it Panina? Yeah, please, unmute. Where did you
Here
go?
we go. Okay.
There you are. Okay.
Can you hear me? I think it has
yes.
to do with the birthrights of the firstborn. The whole idea it was that the son of Hagar was the firstborn.
Yes.
And therefore, I guess he was getting a lot more attention, maybe, or privilege to certain things, maybe when he grows up. So, and it also shows up in the Akedah. When he was told to take his firstborn, he was supposed to take Ishmael, and he didn't. He took Isaac, which was not his firstborn. And therefore, I think
Panina, just one thing before you continue. You have to remember that when God says, and Abraham questions,
take your firstborn.
But he continues. It's not just the firstborn, it's the one you love.
Exactly.
Your beloved son. It's not, the firstborn is like the initial piece. the firstborn of whom? The firstborn of what? But yes, absolutely, you're right. Ishmael is born first. So let's, interpret the language. He was born first, but is he legitimately the firstborn and the beloved of Abraham? Just throwing that out, but continue.
Okay, so this is from there we see that his decisions to take later on Isaac, which was not the firstborn, to be sacrificed, supposedly, because God told him, take your firstborn. He did not. And the whole thing shows up as not acceptable because Sarah is so mad that she leaves him. Actually, she goes back to her own tent in Hebron. She was a princess. She had her own domain, her own tent in Hebron. And as of that moment, she just left them. She lives on her own. So later on, when we see that when Isaac gets married, he takes Rebecca, and it says there that he brings her to his mother's tent.
Yes.
So the whole influence of Sarah having the wife that supposedly make the decisions of who's going to be what, if she is alive after the father is dead, was compromised. And I think this whole idea made it worthy of being included into the Bible stories.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I'm not sure that it's.
I talked to many scholars. They said that she actually, according to all the reading and the way many interpreted it, she actually left him and she went to live in Hebron. And later on, she had her own domain there. And Abraham went to live with Agar later on when she's found.
Let's not go there. Don't
Yeah.
go there yet, because let's talk about that later.
Okay.
Yeah, let's talk about Hagar later and what happens. That is one perspective.
Okay.
Okay, so what we know about Torah is there's multiple interpretations and multiple readings. I have a number of midrashim here, which the rabbis wrote, and they're not always in line with each other. So the question of whether she really left is not in the text. So that's an interpretation. And it's very important to know the difference. But what it says in the Torah, God calls Abraham, right? And Abraham says, here I am, hineni, hineni. And God says, take your son, your only one whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah. Bring him up there as an offering. It doesn't say your firstborn. It's really important to know what the text says. The interpretations, what the rabbis do and the commentaries, is they have all kinds of ways of responding, and they're all different. So you find the one that maybe aligns with your own sense of ethics and values, and you go, you know what, this one feels right to me. But the text itself doesn't say that. Just want to point it out. And it's okay. I mean, the Torah is 70 faces, they say, right? And so what you're sharing is one of the ways. Yes, Penina.
It is. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Okay, it is in the text. It says that Abraham went to live with Agar and her people. There is a chapter, and I'm going to, I don't have the Bible in front of me, but
yeah, save Hagar for later. Save Hagar for later.
Yeah,
because there is something really important, about the whole piece. When he leaves the mountain of Moriah, he goes off, Isaac goes off, and what's clear after the Akedah is God never talks to Abraham again. They don't talk. Now, some people say, oh, Abraham didn't talk to God. Well, how about God didn't talk to Abraham? The last words he got from God was what he was supposed to do, right? Is take his son and then sends an angel to stop him and then shows his pride that he was willing to do whatever he wanted. The question is, did he do the right thing? Did he pass the test? And that's also up to interpretation. If you are traditional Orthodox, the only thing that they see is one thing. He is a man of faith. He is willing to do anything for God. Which is, so the question is that how we want to live our life? Are we willing to sacrifice our children if God calls on it? You know, those are hard questions. And the fact that he avoided, according to the text, any conversation with Sarah in the midst of this, when God said, whatever she says, you'll do, it didn't even occur to him, according to the text, you should go check this out. So we take what we have and then we try to go from there and figure it out. But when he leaves, he goes off. Isaac goes a different direction. And then, of course, we're going to talk about the Midrash. And because the next thing we come to is the birth of Rebecca, but after the birth of Rebecca is the death of Sarah. It's so interesting how they overlap, right? The end of the last Parsha, which is about the Akedah, it ends with her birth. And then the very next thing is what? Sarah dies, right? And it talks about her lifetime, which is one of the things I want to focus on. Her lifetime was 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years. And it is what I want to do with you as well, because my style is to ask you to look inside a little bit. I tend to be a little more spiritually, internally directed. And when we look at this statement of dividing her life into 3 parts, 100, 20, and 7, there's a lot of discussion about that. And then right after it talks about Abraham, what does he do? He eulogizes her. He bewails, means, you know, he cries. And then what does he do after that? He goes to buy the land. And of course, we're very grateful. Why are we grateful? Because the tradition, of course, is to have a hesped. One of the most important things when someone dies at the funeral is to have a hesped, a eulogy. That's the first thing he does after she dies. And he wails. And we are allowed to grieve and mourn because it is truly what is going on inside of us when we lose somebody that we love. And then, of course, we need to be buried. And Abraham is the one who sets the standard. We need to have land. It's precious, the earth, so we can go back into the earth. So let me share a couple of things. I want to read to you because there's so many incredible women who make commentary. It's very late in the game. You know, most of the midrash we read are all written by men. And in modern times, when I say modern, one of the books that I have was published in 1997. So the first rabbi who was Reformed was ordained in 1972. That's the shift. That's a huge shift in our tradition. In fact, she graduated with my husband, Rabbi Steve Robbins, in 1972 in that class. And so in the 70s is the beginning of something very unusual, which we take for granted. Women's voices, women's interpretation, women's commentary, women's discussions. What we've come to, you know, in the 50 years is you guys can sit there and talk and engage and come up with concepts and respond to what you appreciate most. But there are these books now that are not in the canon itself, but it's the way we think and relate. You know, there are people who feel that Abraham was a failure. We know he had tests. They say he had 10 tests by God. But the big one was the Akedah. And if you're not Orthodox, And if you're open to interpretation, like a renewal or reform or trans-denominational, which is kind of what I would call where I come from, or even conservative, we're open to possibilities and different ways of explaining things and understanding things. For many people in the modern age, Abraham was a failure. And it was Sarah who was really the hero. Why? Because he put the top of the mountain, the spiritual divine quest, as holier and more important than his own family. I mean, think about what that really means for you and your family. Do you all have children? Some of you have grandchildren. Can you imagine if someone came to you and said, look, you want to have a few more years on your life? You want to show your devotion to whatever? Take your grandson, sacrifice, make an offering. What would you do? What would you do? Tell me, some of you, what would you do? How would you feel? What would you say? How would you respond? Come on, what's going on? Imagine being asked that of you.
It's not an easy thing to do.
No.
You'd have to think a lot.
Really? Yeah. I mean, there are many women. I'm talking about you as women, okay? Forget your husbands, forget the grandfather. This is you, the mother and the grandmother. And there are many who would say, are you kidding? They wouldn't even have to think about it. Take my life. How come mom didn't say that? Take me. My child, my beloved, my one and only, the one who's supposed to inherit, the one who's supposed to bring, the rest of the blessings forward into the world, into the future. Anybody else? What does that feel like? Just feel what somebody says to you. Bring your child, your beloved child. Yeah, Doris. You have to unmute. Sorry. I know it's like back and forth and back and forth.
I could never sacrifice my sons. They mean too much to me, and there's no way I would do it.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. And there are women who wrote commentary to that effect. If it was Sarah God came to, she would have said, you know where you can go. No way, Jose. I waited 90, she waited 90 years for this blessing, right? And she was also told the promise that would come through Isaac. So there are some who see Abraham and they go, what a failure. His values, there are people who talk about Moshe as well, who abandoned his wife, right? And his children to be, this divine presence in the world and be connected to God. He was so connected, he had to wear a covering on a veil because of, the kind of energy and light that came from him. We want to be close to God, but truly, do we want to be that close so that we feel it's almost impossible to stay in this physical world and be close to our spouses, our friends, our children, our family? It is a big price to pay to be a Moshe, an Avraham. It truly is. It's not easy. And then there are some in the stories like Joseph. He was a little bit of an arrogant teen, but in the end, there were a lot of horrific things that happened to him, but he saw that as the process of being available in this world to do good. He understood that God's plan was the most important thing, everything that was difficult, the pain, the suffering, he knew his brothers wanted to kill him. They wanted to get rid of him. He ends up in prison. He waits there. Who knows how long before somebody in the palace remembers, that's the guy who could help Pharaoh with his dream. And he makes his brothers still feel like they did nothing wrong. It's okay. It was God's plan. So there are some personalities that are rooted in the world, and they live in this world, but somehow they're vehicles for God's blessings. And then there are people like Moshe and Avraham who have this relationship, this superhuman, beyond imagination relationship, and the price that their families pay. There is commentary that says that the reason Moshe's sons don't get to be priests is because of his behavior as a father. That's commentary. You don't have to accept it, but just to be aware, the thinking of some rabbis is this man failed his family. He chose God over his wife. Even his sister and brother criticized him at one point. It's like, you're not sleeping with your wife. What is wrong with you? You're not spending any time with your children. And there actually is a very interesting comment about Moshe not being in the Haggadah. I don't know if you've heard this. He's left out of the Haggadah. You know why? Because he wasn't a good dad. And the Haggadah is so much about parents with their children, answering the questions. So sometimes we read about this beyond a human relationship and we go, oh, wow, wouldn't that be something? And then when you realize the price you might pay for it. So, we seek in this world to be close to God in what ways we can. But there are people who have written of the failure of Avraham. And I wanted you to hear that because I wasn't sure if that was anything you had talked about or heard of his failing. Because he didn't even challenge God. Didn't he challenge God at Sodom and Gomorrah? He was willing to fight for strangers. Isn't that interesting? His ethics and values were so strong. Like, if I can find 10 righteous people, are you really going to destroy the whole country? What's wrong with you, God? And yet, go ahead, Susan.
So
Sorry.
I have a question with that. I agree with you. So why is he a founding father? I mean, I get it that he followed God's commandment, and maybe it was too much of it, of the commands. Why is he a founding father with these?
Why is he the first?
Songs?
Yeah, it's a very good question. First of all, when he's told to leave, lech lecha, go, get out, get away from your parents, get out of this idolatrous environment, please go. He's willing to do that, take a risk. He already, according to the commentaries and the Midrash, already believed that there was this God, because the story of breaking the idols while his dad's away, and dad comes home,
Yeah.
and his father is furious, so he takes him to the king, and Abraham is thrown into the furnace, into the fires, but he comes out whole. And because he believes so strongly in God. This is before being told to leave. And some might even say the reason he's told to leave is because he's already proven he's committed. And maybe that's the point, is that Abraham shows very early on and takes us in the direction we need to go. And he's not an Israelite, he's called an Ivri. And avar, the root of that word, means to cross over, to go past a boundary, to keep moving beyond. And he's willing to do that. And God asks him, because he sees, this is a guy I can trust, right? He believes in me. He hasn't even seen me, and he believes in me. And everyone else believes in idolatry. So in that sense, he's already shown he's got to be the first one, because he's the first one that acknowledges this hidden God that we believe in.
So that's I get that,
Yeah.
but that's just the obvious thing. I mean, I'm thinking like the categorical imperative that you believe in something and you do everything for it, but you're also oblivious to some other qualities that you should not be oblivious to, which is like taking the life of his son.
Yes, yes. I mean, murder, first of all, is a no-no.
Right,
That was in the Noahide laws. That's even before the Ten Commandments.
right.
And your own child, of all
Yeah.
things, the gift, this blessing that you receive at 100 years old. You know, they say Abraham is tested. He passed for some 9 out of 10. I guess that's not bad. You know, 9 out of 10 is pretty good. For some, as I say, the Orthodox traditional community sees the 10th one as the absolute faith. If God tells you to kill your spouse or your child and you're willing to do it, hey, you passed the test. I don't buy that. I don't believe that for a minute. And there are many of us, thank goodness, who have other points of views. So we're not locked in. You know, that would be horrible for Judaism and for all of us if there was one answer and that was the right one. What a horrific thing as a role model for the rest of us, right? Be willing to sacrifice your child. The way the women write many stories, it's if God had gone to Sarah, she would have said no way.
You bet.
Right? And maybe God knew that. And he thought, okay, we know we know where she's at. Let's really see where Abraham is at. And it's, yeah. So I hear you, but I do, I do think that what he does from the beginning is so critical for the future of our religion, that he is, in Judaism, we have 3 names. The first one is Ivri. Historically, we are Ivri. And then the next name is Yisrael, thanks to Jacob. And then around the Roman times, we get Yehudim, right? Which really comes from Judah and how he did teshuvah and emerged as this amazing human being. He was willing to chime in with the boys, to do something terrible to Joseph. He didn't want to kill him, but he was willing to go along with it. But he shifts and changes when they all come to see Joseph, because he says, which is the big transformation, is please take me and let Benjamin go home, right? The story of Joseph is playing with them. But what Yehuda proves is he could actually transform into a man of great value and sincerity and protect Benjamin, who was from another mother. So we have 3 names. We are all Ivri. We come from Ivri. We come from Abraham, who is willing to, go through the border. We are all Yisrael. Why? Because we're willing to struggle with God. We're willing to wrestle with God, right? And I believe Sarah was willing to wrestle with God. And Abraham proved that there were times he was willing to wrestle with God. But on the 10th one, no, he wasn't willing to wrestle with God. And then, of course, we become Yehudim, Judah, which has to do with gratitude, hoda'ah. So we have these three important names that describe us that we should identify with: taking risks and crossing borders, being willing to wrestle with God, and being full of gratitude. Those are three qualities and names that all of us own.
And then Hebrews come later with Moses, right?
What do you mean?
Well, we were called Hebrews. Later.
Oh, you mean being
Yeah,
called the Hebrews. Yeah, but the
Yeah.
word Hebrews
That's
really
later.
comes from Ivri.
it does, yeah, okay.
Because when I say to you, can you speak Hebrew? Ma shalomech ivrit, can you speak Ivrit? Becomes Hebrew.
Ah.
So it's really an extension of Ivri,
Well, that's good to
Ivri,
know.
which
Yeah.
becomes Ivrit.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's not separate and apart. So let's talk a little bit. I want to read something to you that someone wrote, a woman wrote. I think about it this way. This is a woman who's writing in response to Rashi in the 11th century. You know, he's one of the most famous of the commentators. And he talks about 120 and 7, that each of these represent a part. Okay, they're aspects of her life. So this author writes, I think about it this way: Sarah's first 100 years were lived in the fullness of her longing, and the next 20, her journey begins anew with the secrets of union with her beloved. And in her last 7 years, she ascends to the light. There is a sense of closure at each of these 3 points in her life and a willingness to go forward. We can see our own lives in a similar way, holding touch points that we can barely imagine. Moments pass by and we are unaware of our longing and potential union, and it's difficult to see our own stories, our beings ascending towards the light. And then suddenly there is this liminal moment, an inflection point, a period of great change and transition. A door closes and another one opens. We're not necessarily prepared. We don't know in advance. There is no roadmap. But in a way, everything has led to this moment. We are created to live within it. And she talks about a moment in her life when her daughter got married. For her, that was the liminal moment. So I guess the question I wanted to ask all of you to think about is about your own lives. If you were to divide your lives, your life, each one of you, into parts, into sections, perhaps 3, like Sarah. You know, for some people, they might say body, mind, and spirit. You know, the body, the physical part, is a lot of our youth. The strengthening, the growing, the beautifying. And then the next one, the mind, is what we learn and expand and understand about life. And then the last, the spirit, the light that shines in our lives. And what I always teach is, even if our bodies diminish, our souls continue to expand. And as much as you're willing to let it, as much as you're willing to pursue it. So when you leave this world, you have a very expansive soul that continues on, even though your body is frail or smaller or not as healthy or tiny, however it ends up. So if I ask you that question, can you think of your life divided into some parts and how each of them had a certain importance? Yes, Susan, did you want to respond?
Oh, yeah, I think that's a very good division. I would say it's a similar thing, youth, body, and quick learning, and waiting to get educated, and then career, and then afterwards comes up. I mean, it's like I sometimes think like this old age, which I mean, it's like a curve like that. And some things go back, unfortunately, to childhood in the sense that, uh, it's more difficult to walk, and you get all these things that you didn't even think about for
Yeah.
how many decades. And spiritual then too, I think happens because I'm not doing so much in the world, that the career is gone. And so what do you think about? So I think there is a kind of curve. They speak of a learning curve, but they're different phases of one's life. And I
Yeah.
think milestones in the life too also make a difference. That's outside of you, but what happens, to your children, to your husband, and in the world, those are kind of checkpoints.
Yes, yes, there are these points in our lives that we reach kind of these destination places, and then we refocus maybe for a while, and then there's a new destination place. Yeah, there's family, there's work, there's friendships, there's learning, understanding, there's teaching and mentoring. And then there's how we nurture ourselves, which is kind of what I call the spiritual practice of our lives, whether it's through prayer or it's through study like Torah, or through meditation, which is one of the things I lead, mindfulness, qigong, which is body movements, but a very spiritual way of doing that. I've been putting together a booklet. One day, hopefully it'll get done and I'll share it, but it's looking at aging and growing and moving through life in a particular way, and that there are 4 parts that we all need all the time to keep that going, to flourish through life. And I will share that when it's done. It's not quite finished yet. Merle, it looked like you had your hand up.
My hand was on my chin.
And your
But yeah, I'm thinking a lot of what Susan is saying. And I'm also thinking that my daughter and I, and my husband, my son-in-law never really knew my mother, channel a lot of what we teach our granddaughters through my mother and through my grandmother, though they never really knew either of them. And the expansion in them is through what we were taught and what we're teaching them.
Yeah, absolutely. We become the vessel for what came before. In fact, where is it? I came up with something. It has to do with something called gematria. Is that a word you guys know? Yeah, taking the numerical value, making meaning. So when I looked at 120 and 7, so 100 is the letter resh. That's 200. If I look at the Chaf, it's 20. And if I look at Zion, it's 7. And where did I put it? I then found that those 3 letters, Zion, Chaf, Resh, is the word for remember, Zachor, Yizkor. And then I switched it around and I came up with this phrase, Rachamim, when you remember, compassion when you remember. And I just kind of gleaned that all from the first statement of 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. And I put it together in a way that if we can impart compassion through our remembrances, and in a way, Merle, that's what you're talking about. Your remembrances of your mother, grandmother, is through this chesed, the compassion and the love and the care that somehow you experienced and want to pass on. It's really beautiful. And I know you guys have probably heard of ethical wills. Yes. I mean, it's been around for a little while, but one of the things that's beautiful to do is to sit down one day. I kind of confronted this during COVID. I don't know why. I was very worried about dying. In that period of time, it was quite frightening. And if you ended up in the hospital, nobody could come see you. And my husband actually ended up in the hospital over and over and over again, and I couldn't go in. But I worried about dying as well. So one day I thought to myself, I've got to write down something. If I was taken suddenly, what do I want to leave my children with? And I just wrote, a short statement of what I hope for them, what I wanted to see for them, how I hope they'd live their lives. So you are passing it by teaching it, but what if you got snuffed out and you couldn't do that anymore? So I would suggest that you all think about sitting down and writing, what are the values, the beliefs, and the guidances you want to leave if you're not there to share them or to role model them? What last words would you like to leave your children? And, in the story of Abraham and Sarah, the sad thing is that when you read let me just share this, the actual, let me go back. When you read the actual Midrash, which is from Tanhuma, let me just read it. While all this was transpiring, meaning Abraham and Isaac, up the mountain and then whatever down, Satan visits Sarah in the guise of Isaac. Satan pretends to be Isaac. And when she sees him, she says, "What did your father do to you, my son?" And he replies, "My father led me over the mountains, through the valleys, until we finally reached the top of a certain mountain. There he erected an altar. He arranged the firewood. He bound me on the altar, and he took a knife to slaughter me. If the Holy One, blessed be he, had not called out, 'Lay not your hand upon the boy,' I would have been slaughtered." He had hardly completed relating. So he's telling the story, and he can hardly finish the story of what had happened when Sarah faints and then she dies. As it is written, "And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep her." From where did he come? From Moriah, the top of the mountain. This midrash is so powerful. So Satan is in this guise of someone she recognizes, of course, her son, who supposedly, according to commentary, she's looking for him. She can't find him, and she's wondering, where did he go? And he comes to tell her, "Oh, my dad took me. And he almost killed me." And just her hearing that, she keels over. She faints and then has probably, a heartbreak, a heart attack that breaks her heart. And she doesn't even know that he's alive and well. This midrash is so powerful. I wanted to share it with you. What's your response to the midrash?
Well, I think it's very interesting, but you may have heard it elsewhere, and that is actually what happened. Although I think just now we read it, but Satan doesn't say that it was God's command, which makes it even worse.
Well, there are midrashim that have Satan being the one that kind of coaxes Abraham, like teases him, coaxes him, sure. Yeah, you're not going to do it? Oh, sure. Like playing with him. But so many of the approaches to this is that when she just hears about what occurred because she didn't know,
right,
that's it. It just takes her.
Even the thought, even without it occurring, the thought that her husband was going to kill her son is also worthy of having a heart attack,
Oh, absolutely. It's not just that he came close to death. It's that her husband was willing to do it.
Yeah.
And all of that information, message, which appears to come from her own son. In a way, it's like, okay, he's here. Hear him out. He's back. She doesn't know that it's, the evildoer. But the idea, as you're saying, just hearing what her husband was willing to do is enough, right, for her to have a heart attack. Anybody else have any response to what I just shared?
I just think that even thinking about the process is enough to really do some damage to you.
Oh, without
I mean,
question.
having to respond, whether it's your husband, whether it's yourself, whether it's anything you're told to do. I mean,
Yeah,
you have
just
to
being
think
faced
about
with,
it, but then after you've thought about it, how does that make you, that can do damage to you.
oh, absolutely, just being asked the question. Remember Sophie's Choice? Remember the movie where she's asked to choose one of the children? I mean, just being faced with a choice of which you feel like you don't have a choice is just kind of a remarkable reality in and of itself. But according to the Midrash, because Panina had mentioned it earlier, Isaac and Ishmael go and get Hagar in the text itself. Her name is now Keturah. Keturah. But what the commentators and the Midrash feel is they went to get Hagar to redeem what Abraham did, which was being willing to throw her out of the house. And he marries this woman who for some people is Hagar, for some people is somebody new and different, but and he has more children and a whole nother life. Has a whole nother life and goes on. And then Ishmael, of course, becomes the father of Muslims, Arabs, and Abraham for us. And then I had this very weird thought. I'm just going to say it out loud. It's a weird one as I was preparing. And that is that when Sarah is the one who says, get rid of them both, that the whole Akedah was a punishment to her for what she did. Now, it's just a whole way out kind of reflection on the Akedah, that who was really being tested and who was being punished. It was Sarah for her lack of compassion and care and love that she was really known for when it came to Hagar and Ishmael, and that she was willing to let Abraham destroy, because the understanding was once they left and went into the desert, they would die, right? And that this was her punishment, that she had to lose her son because she was willing to set it up for Abraham to lose his other son.
So I want to push back against that.
No, listen, that's okay. It was a crazy thing. I'm saying it out loud, but I'm not saying I buy it. I just want
to push back against that. I think Sarah is more of a heroine. Not heroine, a heroine.
Yes. A heroine, yeah. Not a heroin addict, but a heroine.
Yeah, because Hagar started getting haughty towards.
Yes, she did. Yes, she did.
Which makes Sarah's position even worse because she was only 90 when she had this child. So it's kind of like was it Penina and Hannah that taunting the other wife essentially. Then also she saw Ishmael playing with her son.
Yes, yes.
Playing has some potentially some sexual connotations to it. Was it molestation? And also he was 13, he would have been maybe 14 when Isaac was 1. He was a teenager already.
Yeah, no, there's no question. Absolutely. I mentioned that at the beginning, that
Yes.
the rabbis, many of the rabbis look at that story of them being at the party together and that there was really some inappropriate behavior. And there are others that say, no, maybe they were just having fun because
And when,
her response is about the inheritance.
yes, and then when Hagar leaves with her 14-year-old son, you would expect him not to be hidden in the bush or something, and a baby is the way she's treating him. And Abraham was at fault, and Susan Nanas pointed this out. He sends them off with a little thing of water. This guy was wealthy, Abraham.
Oh, of course.
He could have sent them off with cattle and sheep and more.
Yeah, camels that store water and people to guide them. Absolutely. I mean, when he finally does what Sarah tells him to do, there is this understanding that they're being chased out to die.
That's the understanding, but Sarah didn't say that. And in fact, God told Abraham to do what Sarah said.
And Sarah says, get rid of them. Get him out of here. I don't want him to share them.
Well, you know, and Maimonides says, choose your neighbors and choose your friends and don't live in an area where there are nasty people. And she's protecting her son, for goodness sake.
Yeah, she is. She is, but some people say, well, she could have protected him. She could have created a home and an environment where they both could live, maybe not in the same building. There could have been more compassion for both this woman and this boy and still separate them and have boundaries and limits. It did not have to be this way.
And Hagar was Egyptian, so she's
yes,
going
she was.
back to
she
her
was the
own
Pharaoh's,
people.
believed to be the Pharaoh's daughter.
Well, she's going back to her own people then, and she'll raise her son as part of that people. So I don't see it. I see Sarah as protective, and I see her actually doing the right thing.
Well, that's fine. Listen, we each have to find what we connect with and what appeals in terms of our values and ethics, but we get multiple answers and possibilities, and the creativity of the rabbis in their minds are what we treasure. But I thank you for having this opportunity to see you again and to be with you. And I just ask you to take the blessings of what we learn in Torah, and maybe what we learn here is to look at our lives and how they're divided up. What's the beauty and blessing in each of them? What are the lessons we learn in each of them? And what direction do we want to go in that whatever that last 7 years is for Sarah, what that means for you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much.
You're welcome. Be well.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.